The guest for today's episode on Harshaneeyam is Ruth Martin. Ruth Martin studied English literature before gaining a PhD in German. She has been translating fiction and non-fiction books since 2010 by authors ranging from Joseph Roth and Anna Arendt to Volker, Weidermann and Shida Bazyar. She has taught translation at the University of Kent and the Bristol Translates Summer School and is a former co-chair of the Society of Authors Translators Association. She translated Shida Bazyar's The Nights Are Quiet in Tehran from German to English. The novel was longlisted for the International Booker Prize 2026. Set across 4 decades, from 1979 to 2009, this is a polyphonic novel of one family's flight from and return to Iran. Here she is, Ruth Martin.
So I grew up in Cornwall, which is the kind of far southwest corner of the UK. And in the 80s and 90s, when I was a kid, I mean, it's changed a little bit now, but certainly back then there was very little kind of cultural and linguistic diversity there. There was no language learning in primary school either. I think now there's been a kind of revival of the Cornish language. So, which for a long time was just considered to be a dead language, but people are learning it now through primary school and in clubs and things. But that hadn't happened at the point when I was growing up.
So Cornish is your mother tongue?
No, sadly. I mean, I wish I would have learned Cornish as a kid. It's really difficult, actually. It was just English for me, and I and all my friends were monolingual, basically.
Okay.
So that's the point where I started from. So I would say my love of books and reading preceded my love of languages by quite a long way. So when my brother and I were little, my parents both read aloud to us, which I think is so important for kind of sparking that love of reading. My mum was very good at this, but my dad was the one who really got into it. I remember him reading us Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories and doing all the voices of the different animals. He was so good. He read us The Hobbit as well, with all the voices.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 2 books that I remember.
No, do you have the recordings of that?
Sadly, no. I mean, there were audiobooks of The Hobbit as well that we listened to growing up.
Say in your dad's voice.
Yeah, no, I wish. I could ask him now, I suppose. They wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
But there were 2 books that I really remember from childhood, picture books, but they were written as the text was like a narrative poem by Richard Adams, who wrote Watership Down, and they were called The Tiger Voyage and The Ship's Cat, and the illustrations were beautiful in both of these. I urge people to seek them out. But really, it was the poetry, it was the sound of the words that I really loved about them. They have all these clever rhymes that really kind of tickled something in my brain, and we would go on these long walks at the weekend, and my dad and I would be making up silly rhyming poems as we went. That's a big childhood memory for me. So I always thought I would do something with books. I mean, that was definitely my first love. And whether that was going to be working in publishing or writing them myself, maybe, I thought that was going to be the trajectory. But then when I did start learning another language, I think the way that languages are taught in schools, it takes a really long time before you're able to read anything resembling literature, So I didn't really put the 2 things together, the language and the literature, until I was basically an adult.
Now, why German? PhD in German?
Yes. I started learning German pretty much by accident, which sounds ridiculous, but I went to this kind of big state secondary school where at the start of year 7, so when we were 11 years old, you got put into one of two populations, and one learned French and one learned German. And I just happened to be put in the German population. So it was completely by chance. Although I was really glad actually that happened. I felt that was a lucky chance, because German kind of made sense in my head. It's a very logical language. You learn a rule for something, and that is the rule. It's not. I imagine learning English as a second language is a nightmare, because you learn a rule and then there's like 4 different exceptions to it.
Yeah.
So yes, I got to A level. I carried on with my German through school. So post 16, I think that was the first time I read literature in German. And I remember reading in class Vor dem Gesetz, Before the Law by Kafka, which is like a little parable, a little short story that's embedded in the novel The Trial. And that's the wonderful thing about Kafka, is that he has these fantastically complex ideas, but they're couched in really simple language. So you can read it as a school child. Kids in German schools are reading Kafka. It's easy to read, and it's like you need a PhD basically to be able to understand it, but you can read the words and understand the sentences. We had a little German book club at A level. There was only about 3 of us. It wasn't very popular, but we read Patrick Siskin's Perfume. And that was another kind of light bulb moment for me, because we were reading the translation as well as the German, and they were different, and they were both had this immensely rich, evocative language, but they felt different, and I found that fascinating. But yeah, it was the possibility of reading books in German, I think, that kept me learning the language.
Now, how did you get into translation?
I found it quite hard to get into translation. I mean, again, it started off as a accidental, I suppose. But and now, if you are starting out, I think there's quite a lot of support for emerging translators. There's a lot more MAs in translation. There's networks and events, and there wasn't so much of that when I was starting out. So I started in about 2010.
No, this BCLT was not there at that time.
Yeah, no, the BCLT summer school was there, and I went to that in 2012, and that was really, that was the thing that changed everything, I suppose. Because before that, I translated an extract from a novel for a friend who was setting up a literary journal, and she couldn't afford to pay any actual translators, so she asked me. And that kind of got me hooked, but I was working in something completely different. I was doing conferences and events at the time. So it wasn't until the summer school 2 years later that I really I met a lot of other translators, and I became an early member of the Emerging Translators Network, which was really, that was what I needed. I think I just needed that community, people to provide support and advice, and that's definitely what I found there. And they're still my people, the original ETN and summer school people. I saw a lot of them earlier this week at London Book Fair.
Who was your mentor?
I didn't have a mentor as such. And I mean, that's the BCLT mentorship program was really wonderful for starting people's careers as well. But I didn't do that. I started with nonfiction. I think a lot of people do, especially because I had kind of an academic background. So I was getting more academic books, and I sort of worked sideways into literature from there.
So which is your first published translation?
It was a psychology book called Rage, by a Swiss psychotherapist called Theodor Itten, which was in, I think that was 2011. So that would have been my first published book.
One writer you have been translating regularly is Nino Haratishvili. So you translated 3 of her novels. So what do you have to say about her progression as a writer?
Yeah. So I met Nino at that summer school in 2012. She was the writer who was invited to the German workshop. And that's also where I met Charlotte Collins, who I've co-translated 2 of her novels with.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So the first one we did of hers was The Eighth Life, which was Nino's breakthrough novel. Really, it's been translated into 25 languages or something like that, and it was a huge bestseller. It's still a huge bestseller. And Charlotte had stayed in touch with Nino. She's much better at staying in touch with people than I am. And she did a sample translation and then brought it to Scribe, the publisher who ultimately bought the rights, and asked me to co-translate it. And it's a huge novel. It was in German. It was nearly 1,300 pages. So yeah, and that's why she wanted a co-translator on it. So I was.
What is this about? What is this novel about?
It's kind of a family saga about a Georgian family through the whole of the 20th century. It's wonderful. It starts with a man who has a chocolate factory, and then all the descendants of the chocolate maker who go through, the Second World War and communism and the Soviet Union, and then the end of that. It's a great. If you want to know about the history of Georgia, it's really good for that as well.
Oh, nice. Please go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
But yeah, we spent a long time with Nino's writing just because that book was so long. And she has quite a distinctive authorial voice. Like I would recognize her writing anywhere, I think, now. And when that book was successful, Scribe bought her back catalogue, like her 2 first novels, which were much shorter. So I ended up then translating Juja, which was her first novel. And you can it was really interesting because you can see her in that experimenting with different styles. She came from a theatre background. She was a playwright and dramaturg. So some of the bits of that novel are written out as a script, and then there are different styles within it, and you can see her developing as a writer almost in real time, I guess. And Charlotte did the other novel, My Soul Twin, which we'd worked on extracts from that at the summer school. And then we came back together for The Lack of Light, which was published last year. So Nino has basically been with me for my whole career as a translator. And it's a huge privilege to have such a long relationship with a single writer, I think. And to have such a deep knowledge of her work as well.
Now, how does it help as far as your progression of translation is concerned? Skill set in translation, sticking with one writer and evolving along with the writer.
Oh yeah, I think we've definitely done that as well, and it's been interesting. There were a few years between Charlotte and I translating The Eighth Life and translating Lack of Light, and it was interesting to come back together and see how we had both evolved as translators, and feeling a lot more confident, I think, in what we were doing with the text. Yeah.
Now we will come to this work, which is long listed. The writer, the author, Shida Bazyar, her major works, including the other novel that you translate, more recent, that is Sisters in Arms, the recent one. The earlier one is the one which is long listed, right? So, what do you say about her voice? What is so unique about her when you compare to the other writers in the contemporary German literature? Where do you place her?
I think there's kind of a combination of things that makes Shida unique in the contemporary literary scene, I guess. I think for her, the personal is political. As a minoritized writer in Germany, where the far right has been on the rise for quite a long time now, you kind of don't have a choice about that. her life, her background has been politicized. And that's the position that she's writing from. Although, actually, I would say in her writing, the personal is definitely front and center. She writes about people, about individuals, and the kind of all the different and unexpected ways they react to the circumstances in which they find themselves. She's also incredibly observant about kind of the intricacies and the minutiae of interpersonal relationships, of social phenomenon and human behavior. And I can illustrate this because there's a few moments that really stood out to me from Sisters in Arms, which was a joy to translate, and I really recommend that as well. But it's about three friends who grow up on a council estate. They're all from various immigrant backgrounds, and one of them, Saya, says that when she was growing up, if she ever went round to someone's house for dinner, she had to do what she called the elbow check, which was to see if people had their elbows on the table, because she knew that in some, posher houses, that was a rule that you didn't put your elbows on the table. So if anyone did have their elbows on the table, then she could just relax and eat normally. And if they didn't, then there were probably other rules that she was unaware of, and she'd have to be hyper vigilant all through the meal. And I hate to use the word relatable, but that I have done that exact thing, as a teenager going around to other people's houses and trying to work out the etiquette. There's another moment where the narrator, who is one of these three friends, she goes out for coffee with her ex-boyfriend, and she wants to see him. Like, she's still kind of in love with him, but everything he does is really infuriating. And she knows that he will order really strong coffee, but then he'll want to put loads of sugar in it because he doesn't actually like the bitterness. And she's just like, why? And I think, anyone who has been for coffee with their ex will recognize all of these things that she says. So, yeah. And the third thing I think that makes Shida special is the very close attention she pays to language in all her work. But yeah, in Sisters in Arms, the narrator comes from this sort of working class immigrant background, but she also has a sociology degree, and you can hear that in the text. The language is it's quite colloquial, and then there are these little shifts in register where she talks about something she's observed in a kind of sociological way, but it's really subtle and it's really clever, and I think, it's all this combination of things that really makes her stand out for me and really makes me absolutely love her work. She is one of my favorite writers.
No, the nights are quite in Tehran, which is longlisted now for the International Booker. Please give us the historical backdrop.
The novel begins in 1979 with the revolution, which we know as the Islamic Revolution. But I think while it was happening, that wasn't necessarily how it was experienced. There were different political and religious movements who were all opposed to the Shah's rule, but for different reasons. So Behsad, who is the first narrator of this novel, and the novel is in 4 sections with 4 different first-person narrators, all members of the same family, and Behsad is the father. But he's the first narrator, and he is a communist, and that's the future that he sees for the country. He has really high ideals about equality, and that's the movement that he's part of. And then in the chaos that follows the Shah leaving the country, political Islam kind of comes to dominate. So that's the first part. You think about a revolution as being, it's all very obvious what's going to happen from the start, but this is, chaos and confusion, really. And then Behsad meets Nahid in the movement. So they share these same ideals, and they get married, and eventually they have to flee Iran with their 2 young children. So each of these 4 sections there's a 10-year gap between each of them. So
yeah, that's what I found really interesting.
And you get to sort of fill in the gaps, but not all of them.
Correct. See, I have read novels where the same event will be told in different perspectives. 4 characters or 3 characters. But in this novel, it so happens that every 10 years, the voice changes. The character changes completely. 79 to 89, Behsad, 89, Naid takes over, and then their kid. So that is really something. Probably there are other novels which have done that, but for me, it's the first time that I'm reading where the timeline shifts with the voice.
Yeah, and you have to kind of, the next character will tell you what's happened in the interim, or some of what's happened in the interim, but you kind of have to infer what the previous character would have thought about all of this, because you're then seeing them from the outside. Yeah, I love that.
Correct. Now, these people come to Germany, but how they left Iran, then the Nahid tells us about it. How they left Iran and came to Germany.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Shah don't say that. That's really interesting. Yeah. About translation, I could see that these voices are very distinct. Stick to the registers. Each character, in a different register.
I think in some ways, Shida made that easy for me because they're so distinctive in the German. And I find there's some books, as a translator, there are some books you read, and as you're reading it, you can already hear what the English voice is going to sound like. That doesn't happen all the time, but so I found this was quite natural, I guess, because the voices were so distinctive in German. But then Lale in particular, who's the daughter, she's the one who takes over the narrative in 1999. And at that point, she's 16, which makes her a similar age to me. So I think that's probably what I found easiest. I really just sort of fell back into my 90s teenage years for that. I didn't have to do too much research. And then I guess with Mo, I was probably channeling my younger brother a bit, because he is sort of a similar age. And I think the older generation maybe required some more sort of deliberate stylistic choices, because certainly the first couple of pages of Behsad's section had the feeling to me of like a text that was translated from Persian. When I was reading the German, I was thinking, this kind of sounds like books that I've read that are translated from Persian. And it changes a little bit after that, but that was something that I really tried to retain. It's quite poetic. And then Nahid is very contemplative. She's stuck in the house all day thinking about things, and she loves literature. She loves a good metaphor. So I really tried to be aware of all of that.
Yeah, I loved the Nahid's part the most.
Yeah, it's so interesting that everyone has their own kind of favorite character. And it's an incredible balancing act, really, for an author to create these 4 very different characters who actually, you are, of course, everyone's going to be drawn to one more than another, but they are all equally sympathetic. I think you really feel for all of them.
When I was reading about Leila's version, I was wondering whether it's the lived experience of the author.
I know Shida got asked about this a lot when the book first came out in Germany, that like, is this autobiographical? And it's not. I think there are obviously going to be elements of lived experience in there, but she said what she did do was spend a a long time interviewing her parents about their experiences, which are not identical with the experiences of the parents in the book, but all of the stuff that you maybe wouldn't tell your kids. She was like, I want to know about this. I want to know your story of leaving Iran.
Has she been to Iran? The author, has she been to Iran?
Yeah, and she said she had sort of the home movies that they made when they were out there on visits. So that aspect of it, I think, is real. That's, she was watching these videos of her relatives when she was writing the book.
As I told you, I like the Nahid's part best. Now, some lines, that she says that she fears that books have lost the meaning during the journey.
Yeah.
So beautifully written, and there are a lot of references about books. And Hafiz Shirazi's poetry, she talks about.
Yes.
And even poems of this Brecht's poems.
Yeah, and doesn't she say something like the poems that she had read in Persian and she's now reading in German feel like dusty and dry, like she feels love is dusty and dry in Germany. I love
and even
that.
the other novel, I heard about that novel earlier, few years ago, that Not Without My Daughter, there is a reference to that as well. So normally I like reading books where there are a lot of references to literature.
Yes. Yeah, me too.
So, see, in 1989 onwards, the story takes place mostly in Germany, right? Other than Leila traveling to Iran. And there are some references to East Germany and West Germany, the partition and all that. And again, you have rise of fascism, and there are different political sections in Germany, as in Iran. There is fundamentalism. It's very interesting, and I was wondering, was she trying to juxtapose these two? There will be also references in the novel, right? They keep talking about it.
Yeah. Yes. I think there's definitely some juxtaposition, but there's the complication of it as well, because Behsad, he has these communist ideals, but he's never seen the reality. And when they come to Germany as refugees, he wants to go to East Germany, but that it doesn't work out like that. They end up in the West, and actually when he and Nahid are confronted with the reality of what it's like living in a communist system, and Nahid certainly. She's very observant. She gets the nuances of it and the difference between ideals and reality. Things aren't perfect in West Germany. She isn't completely cool with the capitalist system, and people aren't universally welcoming. But actually, she can see a future there, and she is thinking about going back to university and having a career. And Behsad, I think, clings to his ideals a little bit more, even in the face of where they end up. But even in 2009, and right at the end of the book, he still believes in revolution. He still believes in what he did kind of at the start. And I think he's not this inflexible ideologue. He's not a sort of communist foil to the Islamic fundamentalists. He's much more sympathetic than that. Those are not sort of equal and opposite things. It's definitely more complicated.
No, I was wondering the writing of this novel, The Nights Are Quiet in Tehran, later led to her writing of Sisters in Arms, a kind of part 2 in her life in Germany.
Yeah, there's definitely some shared themes in those novels. I think Sisters in Arms is from the perspective of a youngish woman who has grown up in Germany. So it is different, but I think there are little similarities in the settings, like this council estate that the narrator of Sisters in Arms grows up in is very similar to where the family lives in The Nights Are Quiet in Tehran. So
now, in the light of what is happening now in Iran, sadly, right now, sadly. What do you think would be the reactions of Behsad and Nahid?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a white person living in the UK, I can't, I just can't imagine what people in the Iranian diaspora are going through right now. And I think it would be presumptuous of me to sort of project myself into that. But, you know, people who know that their relatives and friends are there and are caught up in all this. I mean, first the massacre of protesters and then this bombing.
Yes.
And all of it in this internet blackout. So you can't really find out what's going on. I mean, there's a little bit of that in the book, but I mean, this is another level.
Yeah, it's totally another level.
I mean, obviously, I think they would be horrified, and dissidents like Behsad and Nahid will also be, really afraid for the political prisoners and the protesters who are locked up in Evin prison with no way to escape the bombing. That's particularly awful. And Behsad believes in revolution, but I wonder what he would be thinking, knowing that protesters have been killed by the regime on such a huge scale. Would he still be hoping for change? I don't know. It's such a long history of protest and backlash at this point. I mean, Behsad and Nahid would probably be in their kind of early 70s now. It's a long time to keep that spark of hope alive. But then the fact that, in recent months, so many Iranians have gone out onto the streets to protest again, knowing that they could be killed, that courage and resilience is incredible. And that's kind of what Behsad embodies as well, even though he's not able to be in Iran. So I guess the answer to your question is probably that I think they would be numb with the horror of it all, but also, proud of their people, I imagine.
Now, could you please read an excerpt from the novel in German or in English, whichever way you are comfortable.
No, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to be brave and do it in German. And I've chosen a little section from the very beginning, which is what I talked about with the feeling that it's been translated from Persian, because I think even if you don't speak German, you can hear the kind of poetry and the rhythm of this. So this is from the very start of the novel. König der Könige haben sie ihn genannt und gesagt, wir feiern ihn. Wir feiern seine Frau, die Schönheit. Sie haben gesagt, wir lieben dieses Land. Und dann haben wir gesagt, wir lieben dieses Land. Wir mussten seinen Neugeborenen feiern, länger als wir es je bei einem unserer Geschwisterkinder getan hätten. Seinen Neugeborenen weit drüben, im Palast der Blumen. Unseren Eltern hatte man gesagt, das Öl, die Amerikaner, die Engländer, alle gehören zusammen, gehören zum Shah, sind gegen uns. Unsere Eltern haben aufgehört zu arbeiten, sind auf die Straße gegangen und zurückgekehrt. Sie hatten Angst vor dem Geheimdienst, haben nichts mehr gesagt, haben nie wieder etwas gegen den Shah gesagt, haben uns zur Schule geschickt und gesagt, wir lieben dieses Land, liebt ihr die Schulen.